Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a product management expert and the principal consultant of Ninth Fourth. I help software executives accelerate growth, prepare for funding rounds and exits, and meet all kinds of challenges from strategy and road mapping to process, experience, and delivery. And today I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Andy. Say hi to everyone. So, a product manager in a community I belong to once asked how to deal with the problem of lazy engineers. And I'm guessing that seems like a fairly common problem. So maybe they're getting part of the way there, they're doing solid work and then just not quite meeting expectations, or they're not testing as much as they ought to be, or my personal favorite, what they've built doesn't quite match the designs or the intent of what you're trying to build. So the key to addressing this issue is really in understanding why it's happening. And there's four main possibilities. Your engineers are underskilled, they're overworked, they're lazy, or they just don't understand why it matters to get the details right. So let's explore all of these potential causes and how to address each one. So underskilled engineers, that's fairly straightforward. Sometimes they just don't have the skills needed to do their jobs. And if that's the case, you can either invest in training them or replace them. The option you choose will be based on whether the developers are employees or contractors, how long you see the relationship lasting, and how interested you are in working with them longer term. You should have a gut feel for whether a particular person is committed to the team, to their work, and to learning, and decide a course of action based on the likelihood that they'll put in that effort to improve. So your engineers might just be overworked. Technologists, they can seem like magicians. They take vague concepts and then they turn them into reality and they can work miracles overnight. But in reality, they're only human. And that means they only have so many hours in the day. They can only do so much in those hours and they burn out just like the rest of us. There's a constant temptation to assign work to engineers as though they're bottomless pits of bandwidth. And sometimes that's because you've got a very real deadline coming up, and sometimes it's just excitement to get stuff out the door really quickly. And that workload can overwhelm even the best engineers. In fact, the best ones sometimes succumb to this the most because they're trying the hardest to get everything done. So here again, you've got some options. If budget allows, you can staff up with more engineers. More realistically and more quickly, you can scale back the workload by really buckling down on prioritization activities and getting really ruthless with what you're trying to accomplish. So maybe your engineers are just lazy. Realistically, no, they're not. I've worked with a lot of engineers over the years and have seen very few, if any, who were truly lazy. I like to operate from a place of assuming the best of people. So when it seems like someone is being lazy, I just try to get to the bottom of why they're not putting in the effort. Often what seems like laziness is actually a lack of motivation, and there's a subtle difference. So your job here is to uncover where that lack of motivation stems from. For one team I ran, it was their previous manager had been borderline abusive. She was disparaging their work, shouting insults at them in meetings. No wonder they weren't passionate. So fortunately, when I came in, I was able to shield them from that manager and show them that I would treat them right. And within a few weeks, they were fine. They were super productive. If you do actually have a lazy developer, obviously you need to replace them. However, I strongly believe that soft skills go a long way to improving the attitude and the output of a lazy developer. So here's where things get a little bit tricky. What if an engineer's work is just not quite right? There can be disconnects in what you expect in the output versus what they think is important to deliver. I've had engineers put a logo in the upper left corner where it's supposed to be, but not line it up with the items below it. I've had them add extra little features because they seemed cool, even though they weren't right for the task flow or the problem we were solving, and it was nowhere in the sprint. I've seen them make things the wrong color because they saw blue in the design and didn't think it mattered that the color was actually a specific hex value. Using the wrong color isn't a bandwidth or a laziness issue. It takes just as much work to make up your own shade of blue as it does to copy and paste the correct value from specs. And it's not a skill problem because clearly they were able to specify a color. So we can guess that the problem might just be that they didn't understand the need for exactness and attention to detail. From a more architecture perspective, engineers may not have a clear picture of how their code and their work will fit in with everyone else's and how they all need to work together. And that's especially common in very junior engineers who aren't used to really collaborative work yet. So they might deem it less important to get specific details right or put in a lot of testing. They might make decisions that make sense for them personally while being wrong for the product as a whole. And this can be the toughest of all those 4 problems to crack because addressing it requires getting very, very detailed, which is time consuming and tedious, or changing the mindset of the engineers and the larger team, which can be tricky. You can start getting extremely detailed in specifications and acceptance, point out every little thing explicitly instead of assuming that a developer will notice that these 5 things are aligned in exactly this specific way in the wireframe. And then you have to stay on top of every single one of those details, pointing out every single deviation every single time. I don't want to do that. That's boring. So I prefer a different approach, working on mindset. Ideally, you want your engineers and really everyone on your team to understand not just what they're doing, but the larger context in which they do it. You want them to know why they're doing these tasks and why it's important to get it right. It can also be helpful to explain to them why the little details are important and guide them towards making a little more care with the specifics. This approach works because not only will engineers start to look for those little details, but they'll start proactively asking clarifying questions. So you'll get, hey, these 5 items are aligned this way in the wireframe, but that could cause problems at a different screen size. Could we line them up differently? Here's a suggestion, right? And now you have a nice collaboration with the engineers on solutions instead of having to nitpick how wrong they are all the time. Ultimately, the goal is for everyone to feel ownership in the finished product. It's a more time-consuming approach up front to get that mindset established, but you'll find that over time you spend less time having to review everything and follow up on errors. And if you found this video helpful, come find me on LinkedIn. I'll throw a link to that in my website below. Thanks for coming and see you in the next one.